Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. And on the program, it's another of our All Things Africa edition. We continue our series looking at the history of the continents and the regions, and we are still exploring North Africa. And we now turn our attention to Tunisia. And who better to teach us about this country or any African country than our returning champion and our tour guide, Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan African Newswire and the Black Agenda Report. Abayomi is a historian, journalist, longtime leftist activist, anti-imperialist activist, longtime Africa solidarity leftist activist, and more. And as always, before we start, just a gentle reminder to our audience to please share widely all of One Plus One's content, past and present episodes, our playlists, help us overcome the far right algorithms and the dominant monopoly Western corporate state media and pseudo leftist websites have in the social media world by sharing our content. Share us across social media. Also, email it to all of your comrades and groups. And please donate if you can to One Plus One at our PayPal. And if people are having trouble and would prefer an alternative form of donation, then do please get in touch with me at yurismatter@gmail.com. And of course, sometimes Facebook blocks my ability to share One Plus One. So again, please share widely. It helps the show immensely, and it's our only way of overcoming colonial, pro-imperialist, sexist, heteronormative, and racist media. So now on to the topic at hand. So Abayomi, as always, firstly, thank you for coming back on the program. And as always, just tell us, what was Tunisia like before French colonization, and what were the conditions of the people when France colonized Tunisia?
Well, this region of Africa, of course, is very much its history and culture intertwined with other contiguous states. We've talked about over the last few weeks Algeria, we talked about Morocco, the Western Sahara. Also, today, these territories are interlinked with Tunisia in terms of its history, um, migration patterns, language, culture, and so forth. So we have to keep this in mind as we move forward throughout North Africa. All these divisions, these lines, these geographic boundaries were drawn by the imperialists, largely after the late 19th century, the Berlin Conference. But even before that, there were, of course, invasions by various European countries and other powers from outside Northwest Africa, which had a tremendous influence. Tunisia had a tremendous influence on the world. We can look back at the ancient kingdom and empires of Carthage, which occurred before the Christian era. We could also go back and look at what happened under the Romans. The Roman influence in Northwest Africa, particularly in Tunisia, lasted, it is estimated, some 8 centuries. You also, after the period of the decline of the Roman Empire, there was the invasion of the Vandals, who we talked about before in relationship to other nation states, modern day nation states in Africa. They weakened the Roman Empire, particularly the one in the West. In the East, of course, still had the Byzantine Roman Empire in Constantinople. That too had an influence. So we had the Berber peoples, who are considered the group which predated the Arab population in Northwest Africa. And we talked about the Romans. And then, of course, after the Romans, there were the Vandals. And then you had the rise of Christianity. When Rome adopted Christianity as a state religion in the 4th century, it began to spread to other areas, contiguous areas. And that, of course, influenced the indigenous people there as well. This predates the Arab and Muslim influence. Many of the ancient Berber civilizations became Christianized. Later, they became Arabized after the intervention of several waves of Arab and Muslim migration, beginning in the 7th century through approximately the 12th century. So there's a lot of external influence in the area. Then we had, of course, going back, we talked about the Carthage Empire, but then the Punic Wars, which was centered right in Tunisia, where they went in and conquered Rome, and Rome in turn came back and reconquered that region of Northwest Africa. Later, we had the rise of the Ottoman Turkish empires around the 16th century. They came in, they established their own protectorates and various forms of city-states and trading posts, and they were heavily influential in the region for 2 to 3 centuries. So we're talking about several thousand years of internal and external combustion that brought about unique culture to the people in Tunisia. It wasn't until 1881 that the French seized control of the area that we know today as Tunisia, and it was taken from the Ottoman Turks after they had been weakened as a result of internal problems and other issues, economic issues in particular. So in 1881, France ostensibly set up Tunisia as a protectorate. And when that happened, of course, resistance broke out among various of the indigenous peoples there in Tunisia. In 1884, 1885, there was the Berlin Conference that took place. And then after that, France was designated as the principal protectorate over the people of Tunisia. This went on, and then, of course, World War I, World War II continued with French domination, calling it a protectorate, but in actuality, it was really a colony of France. After that period, when the antecedents of World War II began, we had the rise of fascism in Italy in around 1922, 1921, 1922, and then later, approximately a decade later, the Third Reich arose in Germany. So you had fascism in Italy, in Germany, later in Spain. So these became what later was termed the Axis powers once they allied themselves with the Japanese imperial forces. So in 1940, the German Third Reich, the Hitler's army, the Nazis marched into France, and there was very limited resistance to their intervention, and we had the rise of what is known as the Vichy French administration, which was a pro-Nazi, German-dominated administration, and this extended to North Africa as well. So the Vichy French, those who supported the Nazis, had control of Tunisia. They had control of parts of Algeria, as well as Morocco. So during the period,
and tell us, what were the conditions of the people like? What were the conditions of the Tunisian people under French colonialism throughout all this period?
well, there was a lot of oppression, racism, exploitation of the people during that particular time period. And as a result of that, there were rebellions. And then in the early part of the 20th century, you started seeing the rise of nationalist movements. The Young Tunisians came about during the first decade of the 20th century. And then later, the Distor Party came into existence. And that was organized around the period right after World War I. So you had these nationalist movements which began to arise in various parts of Africa during this time period. Of course, you had the resistance, armed resistance in different parts of Africa, like Nyasaland. We talked about in Tanganyika, German Southwest Africa, and of course the Ashanti Wars in the Gold Coast, and many others. And this was the same situation in Northwest Africa. In Sudan, for example, there was the rise of the youth leagues that came about. In Egypt, there was the WAF party. But in Tunisia, you had the Destour party,
Mm-hmm.
which came about. Even prior to that, there were pro Ottoman political groupings. The Mansif Bey was one leader, nationalist leader, who eventually was exiled by the French due to his popularity. And so the Destour Party came into existence. They were calling for a return to Tunisian values, the removal of the French, the rejection of French culture and political domination. And this went on between World War One and World War Two, when the situation really began to escalate in regard to the anti-colonial struggle.
Perfect segue to this question. Did Tunisia gain independence through violent armed struggle, or was it one of or was it one of peaceful transfer? And then tell us about the socioeconomic legacy. And I'm just going to say in advance for everybody, apologies for all of the names I'm going to be butchering. It's the Yankee in me, and that's the problem when you're not in university and you don't get access to everybody's internationalism, and then learning how to pronounce people's names correctly. So apologies in advance if I for all the names I'm going to be butchering throughout this entire interview. So Abayomi. so did Tunisia gain independence through violent armed struggle, or was it one of peaceful transfer? And then tell us, and then after you're explaining that, tell us about the socioeconomic legacy of President Habib Bourguiba, who ruled Tunisia during much of the Cold War, July 25th, that's a day before my birthday, 1957 to November 7, 1987. And his party was first called the Neo-Destour Party, that believed, as you already mentioned, Tunisian nationalism, Pan-Arabism, Arab nationalism, secularism, and many ideas, some left-leaning, others right-leaning, known as uh, Bourguibism. And the party later led by him became the Socialist Destourian Party, which more or less believes in the same thing, but embraced more authoritarianism as a way to advance their agenda. This, according to Wikipedia, during the 60s, the party advocated and championed more socialism, but then in the 80s, sadly, it seems that they embraced economic liberalism, and for what it's worth, it was a member of Socialist International, which is where the global center left, leftists, and sometimes strongly more left-leaning parties meet to see how they can advance a global left agenda and help one another out. However, the organization has been dominated by Western European and Nordic social democratic parties who've been guilty of supporting Western imperialism, social imperialism, and since the late 70s and early 80s, many of those parties have pivoted to the hard right on socioeconomic policies on their own working class people. And the same is true of their sister organization, Progressive Alliance, and many of the global South, and those from non-European and non-North American worlds often can be too influenced by this power dynamic and the playbook of Western, Euro, Nordic, social democratic left. So all that said, do tell me about your assessment of the first leader of Tunisia, and please do tell us the good policies, the bad policies, and the ugly, if there is any. Go right ahead.
Yeah, Habib Bourguiba is a icon in regard to Tunisian political history. And it's important for us to acknowledge the fact that under French colonial rule, Tunisia was somewhat of a settler colony. They encouraged French migration into Tunisia. By the end of World War II, there were approximately 145,000 French nationals who were occupying Tunisia. There was also a lot of Italian nationals as well, because Italy shares a very close border, maritime border with Tunisia. And this played a role, of course, during World War II as well. And Tunisia has perhaps the most northern point, Cape Angel, on the African continent. So it is a country that is very, very close to the southern regions of Europe. So that's very, very important that all these colonialist nationals came into the country, and it had a tremendous impact on the language and the culture. And there were periodic rebellions that took place in Tunisia between the 1880s all the way up to the period of the early part of the 20th century. And during the war, of course, there was the demand for national independence. There was also the formation of the General Trade Union, the Tunisian Trade Union Federation, which was allied to the Neo Destour Party. So the Neo Destour Party, that was heavily influenced by Habib Bourguiba, was in fact a party that had close ties with the organized working class in Tunisia. They differed from the Destour Party in the sense that they believed more in mass actions. They wanted more mass demonstrations, general strikes, and they did not think that petitioning would bring about any rapid ascent towards national independence. So during World War II, Bourguiba fell out of favor with the French. In fact, he had actually been imprisoned by the German-backed Vichy government during World War II. And then after the war, he was able to relaunch his political efforts, and they were demanding national independence. And eventually, there was a shift in the colonial administrators in Tunisia during the early 1950s. Then they began to discuss a more palatable, palatable, more moderate form of colonial control, and they did this in other countries as well. This came out of the conference of Free France that was held in Brazzaville in 1944 in Congo Brazzaville, and this was rejected by the Neo Destour Party. They wanted full independence, and negotiations took place. And then in March of 1956, Tunisia became an independent state under the Neo Destour Party. But then a year later, they became a republic. So they're still known today as the Republic of Tunisia.
Yes.
So that is the whole, in a nutshell, what happened between World War II and the period of national independence in 1956, the designation as a republic in 1957. So yeah, it was part and parcel of the whole independence process that took place in Africa. And in 1956, of course, the war was raging in neighboring Algeria. And that, of course, had an impact as well on political developments inside of Tunisia.
Talk a bit more about the legacy of the first president of Tunisia in terms of socioeconomics and yeah.
Mhm.
Talk a bit more about his legacy, the good, the bad, and even even some of the gross mistakes that were made.
Yeah, he was instrumental in organizing a lot of these students, the intellectuals, and the trade unionists in Tunisia. They believed in nationalism, nationalization of the major industries. They eventually became a one-party state, seeing this as a mechanism for rapidly bringing about development, national development, as it relates to economics as well as political unity inside the country. And during the period between 1956, 57, all the way through the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s, the Neo Destour Party and its successors were dominant within Tunisian politics. And the major industry there, which helped the country out economically, was tourism. A
Oh,
lot of
okay.
people who traveled there as tourists, and the fact that they still had close ties, particularly with people in France and Italy, also helped to generate foreign exchange for the national economy. But it was a state that was highly controlled by Bourguiba, who was a charismatic political leader. And of course, at the same time, despite the advances made economically and politically, a lot of economic problems did arise inside the country, particularly high unemployment among young people. And this prompted demonstrations and even civil unrest during the subsequent years after independence, particularly during the 1980s.
Fascinating. That's a perfect segue to perfect segue to this question. What is the socioeconomic legacy of Ben Ali? November the 7th, 1987 to January 14th, 2011. His party, the Democratic Constitutional Rally, according to Wikipedia, they are a Big Tent party, which is pretty left leaning in its support for secularism. It's a member of Socialist International. But in the 80s, the party unfortunately embraced economic liberalism, neoliberalism, it seems, and very autocratic in its support of the citizenry. You already were talking about some of the protests that were happening in Tunisia, which the Tunisian government was very suppressive in. So that would definitely be a very ugly legacy of the first president. And then and now we have Ben Ali. So yeah, so tell us, how do you assess his socioeconomic legacy for the mass Tunisian working class, precarious middle class, and the chronically unemployed and poor?
Yeah, I believe that the resignation, well, it was a forced resignation of Bourguiba in 1987. He was declared incapacitated, so to speak, by a group of physicians inside of Tunisia. Some people considered it a soft coup, that they wanted to move him out. He had been so dominant in Tunisian politics going back to World War II, and with the founding of the Neo Destour Party, and him being a political prisoner and being instrumental in the negotiations for the national independence of the country. He was becoming an older person, so they declared him incapacitated. And then Ben Ali took over. And as you said, it was more of a liberalization of the national economy during the late 80s, the 90s, all the way into the 2000s. Yet the same problems of high unemployment continued, and the lack of democracy inside the country, many people felt was a major concern. Even though you had a lot of European influence and tourism, but at the same time, there was a lot of unemployment particularly among young people. And there was discontent as well among the trade union movement because the level of wages were not keeping up with what they felt their productive capacity was at the time. So all of this was going on. And then, of course, in late 2010, we had an eruption of protests across the country. It started, supposedly, it was said at the time, a young person who was a street vendor was so distraught that he self-immolated, meaning he set himself on fire. And the news of this spread throughout the country. And then there were demonstrations that erupted in various parts of the country, even in Tunis itself, the capital of Tunisia. And the demonstrations escalated. They became violent. And then Ben Ali was able to flee the country in January of 2011. And he went to Saudi Arabia and was granted political asylum there. So the question became, what's going to happen to Tunisia? What direction should Tunisia go in the aftermath of the absence of Ben Ali?
In fact, actually, in fact, in fact, actually, hold that thought because yes, so that was basically the Arab Spring, and actually Tunisia is where the Arab Spring kicks off.
Yes.
And following the ouster of Ben Ali, I had no idea that he actually went to Saudi Arabia. That says everything you need to know also on how the course of events later turned out, which we can probably get into if you want.
Yeah, we will.
And then the power of the power of the presidency was weakened, and the president is basically now largely in charge of foreign policy, while the prime minister deals mostly with domestic socioeconomics. So I ask, then, what is the socioeconomic legacy of President uh, Fouad Mabiza, Prime Minister Bej Kaid is Beji, February 27th to December 24th, 2011. Fouad is a member of the Democratic Constitution Rally, later independence. Your response, Abayomi. Oh, oh, 1 second, folks. Oh,
Yeah, you froze. Yeah.
yeah, sorry. Sorry about that. Yeah. Anyways, actually, do you need me to repeat my question? Actually.
Yeah, go ahead. Repeat it. Yeah,
Okay,
please.
yes. So Tunisia is where the Arab Spring kicks off. Following the ouster of Ben Ali, the power of the presidency was weakened, and the president now largely is in charge of foreign policy, while the prime minister deals with domestic socioeconomics. So I ask, what is the socioeconomic legacy of President Fouad Membaza, Prime Minister Bej Kaid is Beji, February 27th to December 24th, 2011. And Fouad is a member of the Democratic Constitution Rally and later a political independent. Your response, Abayomi.
Yes. Well, after the fleeing of Ben Ali, there was a movement to hold elections rapidly, but they set up an interim government, and there was a lot of demands being placed on the government. A lot of people were not satisfied with the fact that there was no one to seize power in the aftermath of Ben Ali's fleeing of the country. And a similar situation happened in Egypt as well. So you have the military that takes over. They hand over power to a caretaker government and in preparation for elections. So there was still a lot of unrest inside the country. There was relief and satisfaction that they were able to rise up and overthrow a neo-colonial dominated regime under Ben Ali. But the question became, in what direction will Tunisia move? And I think that government, the interim government, could not really address that question. We had later on, with the rise of the moderate Ennahda party, that of course came to the fore as a major issue as well.
So Monsef Marzuki, president, he is part of, at least on paper, a very left-leaning party, Congress for the Republic, whereas Prime Minister Hamaji Jebali, later then Ali Laradia, apologies if I'm butchering their name, both of the same political party, both of the very, I would say, right-wing, almost far-right, and not a party that believes and advocates for social conservatism, economic liberalism, Islamic democracy, and conservative democracy, or as I like to call it, the worst of both worlds, because it's fiscal conservatism and social conservatism. And the last prime minister during this period was Mehdi Jama, who was an independent. What is all of these people's socioeconomic legacy?
Yeah, I think the movement was towards a more moderate form of Islamic rule, abandoning the neoliberalism of Ben Ali. But at the same time, there were problems, economic problems inside the country. And the left wing was not satisfied at all. They wanted more progressive reforms inside the country. And it was still a lot of unrest during that particular time period. Now, Tunisia was designated as perhaps the only, quote, bourgeois democratic Arab dominated state in North Africa and West Asia during this particular time period, because after the so-called uprising or Arab Spring in Tunisia, they were able to have elections and they were able to set up a multi-party democratic system. Whereas in Egypt, what happened was, even though they did have multi-party elections, the Muslim Brotherhood government, the party that was backed by the Muslim Brotherhood, was only able to stay in office for a year, and they were overthrown by military field marshal, and he in fact wound up heading the country, in which he still heads it up until this day.
Yeah,
That
General Sisi.
distinguishes Tunisia in the sense that they have had civilian rulers, but the interim period between, let's say, 2011 up for the next decade was still marked by a lot of political unrest inside the country, and even some uh, terrorist attacks that occurred there, ostensibly in opposition to the ongoing reliance upon tourism in Tunisia. So they have tourism as a major element of their national economy, along with light industrial production and some mining as well.
And let's talk about
But I
Bay.
would say the legacy was not good.
Go ahead, go ahead, go
No, I'm
ahead.
just saying the legacy was not good. It really did not stabilize the country economically, and it fell far short of what progressive forces would want to have seen, considering how Ben Ali was moved out of office.
Yes, and that's a perfect segue to this question. So we then have Bej Kaid is Beji of the Nija Tunis, which is a secularist, left-leaning, center-left party. He's the president, and then Habib Ezeji is an independent. He's the prime minister, and they serve office 6th of February 2015 to the 27th of August 2016. What is their socio-economic legacy? And you talked, and I should have typed this up as a question, but you were talking about how Tunisia is way too much dominated. Their major industry is the tourist industry. Can you talk about the dark side, actually, of the?
Freezing,
Oh,
freezing again.
oh, wait, one moment, folks. One moment, folks. Okay, sorry about that, folks. Okay, can you hear me now, Abayomi?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I
Okay.
hear you now.
Yes. Yes. So, talk to us about the president prime minister of the period February 2015 to 27th of August 2016. What's their socio-economic legacy? And can you talk to us about the tourist industry in Tunisia and why it's so bad for the mass Tunisian working class?
You're breaking up, freezing.
Oh, uh-oh. Sorry, folks. Okay.
Okay,
All
I
good
hear you
now?
now.
Okay.
Yeah, sounds
Yes.
good so far.
Okay.
Yeah.
So sorry about that. So yeah, so
Mhm.
talk to us about the president and prime minister from February 2015 to 27th of August 2016. What's their socio-economic legacy? And talk to us actually a bit more about why the tourist industry is actually really, really bad in general and what makes it so bad for the mass working class, precarious middle class of Tunisia.
Yeah, I think there was the continued reliance on the neoliberal model of economic policy, and the resentment against tourism, of course, is the same arguments that you hear in other Mediterranean basin states, even the ones in Southern Europe,
Yep.
that national resources are allocated to support the tourism industry, that it overcrowds smaller communities, rural areas, small towns, and even some larger cities, and also the cultural influence that may disturb people who are more Islamic or oriented. So I think these are some of the factors that created resentment towards tourism in Tunisia, but they're heavily dependent upon it. And it has a lot to do, of course, with the history of the country. The fact that the French and even the Italians uh, migrated in mass there during the 19th as well as the early part of the 20th century. So, yes, it is a problem in terms of tourism, but they're heavily dependent upon it in regard to their national economy.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question about tourism later, but let's continue on with our historical track. So then comes President Mohamed Inakur of the same party, the Nija Tunis. His prime minister is Youssef Chahid, who is associated with Taha Tunis, whose ideology is secular liberalism, centrism. We all know what that really means. You lean more to the right. Bulgarism, the ideas of Habib Bourguiba. So fairly socially liberal or socially tolerant, and can be either right leaning or left leaning. How do you assess their time in office when looking at socioeconomics and the vast working class, working poor, and precarious middle class of Tunisia?
Yeah, the trade union movement was still dissatisfied because their wages had not kept abreast with what their production capacity required, and of course the reliance on Westerners for tourism also just fueled the discontent that was taking place inside the country. So even though they were having elections, governments were coming and going at the same time, the economy was not improving to the degree that most Tunisians would have liked to have seen.
And since October 23rd of 2019, the president of Tunisia has been Kais Saied, who is a political independent. Does he lean more to the left or more to the right? And before you answer that, let me just also explain that he's had several prime ministers. Elias Farkaha, apologies if I'm butchering his name, who was the prime minister who served under him. His party, the Democratic Forum for Labor and Liberties, or ETACOL, or the French acronym, the FDTL, was, at least according to Wikipedia, is left-leaning to left wing, social democratic, secular. Internationally, they are an observing member of the Party of European Socialists, and internationally a member of Socialist International and Progressive Alliance. Again, this is where center-left to radical left parties meet to see how they can help one another and advance a left-leaning or left-wing agenda. Although, again, as everyone should know, historically, both organizations have been dominated by Western European and Nordic social democratic parties who have been guilty of supporting Western imperialism. And since the late 80s to 90s, they've pivoted hard to the economic right. And the same is true of the sister organization, Progressive Alliance. And many of Global South and those from the non-European, non-North American worlds often are too influenced by this power dynamic. And then since September the 2nd, 2020, several prime ministers have come and gone in Tunisia, with Said remaining president. They've all been independents. Hichem Maichi, 2nd of September 2020 to July 25th, 2021. Then Naij Boudin, the 11th of October 2021 to the 1st of August 2023. Then Ahmed Hachani, 1st of August 2023 to the 7th of August 2024. Then Kamel Majouri, 7th of August 2024 to the 21st of March 2025. And now, currently, since March of this year, the Prime Minister is Sarah Zarafarni. So again, how does one assess Kais Saied's time in office, all these prime ministers who served or are currently serving under him, in terms of socioeconomics? How have the largely working class and all kinds of poor people and the precarious middle class fared under the current leadership in Tunisia right now?
Well, I don't think they're faring well if you consider the number of governments that have been appointed. And Said has come under a lot of criticism on the part of Tunisians, as well as people in the international community. They regard him as an autocrat, that he is really dictating domestic as well as foreign policy inside of Tunisia. And there's been demonstrations against him. But then there are some people who do support him. They said that the political atmosphere in Tunisia was chaotic. There were too many political parties. And that's why they support his efforts as a strong leader to try to maintain authority, maintain control inside of Tunisia. So you have two different positions in regard to his rule over the last several years. But he is regarded as a somewhat of a dictator by people inside of Tunisia, but there's no real strong movement at this time to remove him from office. I don't think the military would be interested in seizing power again, because the level of the mass movement at this point levels that it was after the resignation of Ben Ali in 2011, that whole period between 2011, over the next 5 to 6 years, where there was a lot of political ferment inside the country. Even some of the left-wing elements there. For example, there was a leading left-wing figure who was assassinated mysteriously. And this happened about a decade ago, and there was unrest surrounding that. He was an attorney. So you have left-wing interests, you have trade unionists, you have Islamists. The Ennahda Party is considered more of a moderate Islamist organization. So, yeah, the different and left-wing parties as well, and coalitions that exist inside of Tunisia. But at the same time, it seems to be at a political stalemate right now because Saeed Kais has not been able to be removed from office, and a lot of the political parties that are there and operating in Tunisia have not been able to coalesce to remove him from office or to form some type of alliance. The efforts on the part of the president.
Very briefly, before I ask about Tunisia's foreign policy history, safe to say that he governs from the right, authoritarian rights.
Yeah, I would think so. Nonetheless, when he first came in office, it was pretty interesting because a lot of young people came out into the streets, and because he was perceived as being pro-Palestine. So there was demonstrations, in support of Palestinian liberation. But no, he has not had a consistent political vision domestically or as it relates to foreign policy, as far as I can assess. He has been committed to remaining in power, but in terms of any type of genuine reforms that come outside of his administration, he has not been favorable in that regard.
That's very sad to hear. So that's a perfect segue to this question. So, what was Tunisia's foreign policy during the Cold War and the first decade post-Cold War world? Was Tunisia non-aligned, but mostly in alliance with France, the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Western Europe, and the Gulf monarch proxies in West Asia? Or was it more aligned with the USSR, the Eastern European Communist Bloc, Cuba, Vietnam, and China, or hostile to them, or very much neutral with no one really bothering with no one in the Western imperialist orbit really bothering Tunisia that you're either with us or you're with the commies. I'm very curious.
Right. Yeah, well, I think they were non-aligned during the period of the non-aligned movement. They were co-founders of the first All-African People's Conference, and before that, the Conference of Independent African States. They were one of the attendees. That was in April of 1958, and then later, in December of 1958. Then they were part of the group that was anti-imperialists, along with Ghana and Egypt and others, but they were part of the non-aligned movement, and that is pretty much where they've stayed over the decades. Although they did have the Destur Party at one point, it accepted socialism, but then it moved away from it in later years. So I would not say today that there's any real socialist orientation in Tunisia. Not at all. I think they're just trying to maintain some economic stability and political stability as well.
And often
but in terms of their relationship with the Soviet Union and China, I think it was cordial, and they were non-aligned, so they did not want to get caught up in the war, the so-called Cold War. Now, when the Palestine Liberation Organization was forced out of Lebanon in 1982 by the Israeli Defense Forces, they came in during the middle of that year and bombed all the PLO offices, residential areas. Um, Everything that the Palestinians had built up in Lebanon, they attempted to destroy. It's estimated that some 20,000 people were killed during 1982. And this, of course, prompted.
Yeah.
Okay, this, of course, prompted the. I'm looking, my screen went off. But anyway, during
Yes.
this time period, this prompted the evacuation of the people of Palestine. Yasser Arafat and all of them went to Tunisia, and they were actually welcomed there by the government at that time of Bourguiba. Yet at the same time, what happened during that time period was that they were bombed by the Israelis. They bombed the PLO headquarters in Tunisia during the late 1980s. So yes, they have, of course, been involved, in the armed struggle from that particular standpoint. That they were victims of the Zionist regime inside of occupied Palestine. So yes, they did play a role in that regard by taking the PLO in and Yasser Arafat in and so forth. But by 1987, Bourguiba was gone. But yes, in terms of the role of the Soviet Union and China, there was no hostility, as far as I know, between the socialist states and the state of China, as well as the national liberation movements in Africa, and also the Palestine Liberation Organization, which was dominant during the 1980s in regard to the struggle in Palestine. Hamas was not formed until like the late 80s.
Interesting. So is Tunisia very close then to BRICS, or has good relations with certain members historically and present? And will those continue unless Western imperialism sabotages it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as far as I know, they have not attempted to join BRICS, but at some point they may. But the fact that they're so closely integrated into the world capitalist system, particularly the European Union, they have a special status with the EU. So it may
Yeah,
be
yeah, yeah.
problematic. Yeah, it may be problematic in regard to them joining the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa Plus Summit. France, of course, had offered to join a couple of years ago, and they were turned down flatly, which was a good thing, because all they would do is go there and cause interference and report back to the U.S. everything that the BRICS countries were attempting to do. But at some point, who knows? They may want to join BRICS.
Well, that's a perfect segue then to this question, which is, what has been Tunisia's response to the wave of anti-French and the African Spring that's happening mostly in West Africa?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they are very close to France economically. I have not heard them speak out in terms of solidarity with the Alliance of Sahel States, the AES. But who knows? In the future, things could change. If they get a new president and if the economic conditions in France continue to deteriorate, they may take a different position. But as far as I know right now, they have not spoken out loudly against the ongoing French neocolonialism in Africa. Now, that is different in regard to Algeria, its neighbor, because Algeria waged a protracted armed struggle to gain its national independence from France. And it's still a source of tension in regard to relations between Algiers and Paris. We've mentioned this before when we talked about the history of Algeria, that even the current president of France, Emmanuel Macron, has made statements to the effect that Algeria didn't exist prior to French colonialism, and that the Algerians have overemphasized the atrocities committed by the French during the colonial period between 1830 and 1962. They've honored the Algerians that fought alongside the French during the period of the anti-colonial war between 1954 and 1962. So there's a difference in regard to relations between Tunisia and France and Algeria and France.
And that's a perfect segue to my final question. I might have a follow up question though. I want to ask about tourism, but let me ask you this question, which is it seems to me from the research I've done on Tunisian history, which I'll post in the pinned comment section, the Q&A I did with Chats and GPT, that Tunisia actually does have a very strong left movement, and it seems from even with the fall of Ben Ali and the sort of kind of fake reforms that have happened, that there's been multiple left wing, left leaning parties that have existed. Many of them, many of them also secularists. So they're quite socially liberal, socially tolerant, and feminist to a point. So I have to ask this question, which is: does Tunisia have a strong left wing movement? And in closing, despite many betrayals and shortcomings and so forth that a lot of Tunisian left parties have done, if Tunisia really wanted to eradicate the scourge of income inequality, mass poverty, and unemployment, and all the ills that come with capitalism, neoliberalism, and more, is the only way for Tunisia to really advance is still socialism, Pan Africanism, Pan Middle Easternism, be it Marxism or African socialism. Very curious your response.
Yeah, I would agree. And they do have strong left-wing organizations and left currents um, among the legal community. There has been protests against successive governments. The UGTT, the Trade Union Federation, has left-wing elements in it, and there's other left-wing alliances and parties inside of Tunisia, but they have not been able to come together to consolidate their forces to take power and move towards a socialist-oriented Tunisia in conjunction with progressive forces throughout the region, meaning Algeria, progressive forces in Egypt, and the Western Sahara, and Morocco, Mauritania, all of those countries. There's potential, tremendous potential for a left-wing resurgence. And this has to be done in conjunction with other political parties and progressive states throughout Africa and international solidarity activists as well. And this is needed because they cannot continue to rely on light industry production, mining, and also tourism to sustain the economy. You have high unemployment in Tunisia, just like in Morocco, we talked about several weeks ago, that the unrest that developed in Morocco earlier this year among young people is because they feel they have no real future in regard to the economic policies of the country.
I have to ask this follow-up question. Do you find it's actually I mean, I hate to sort of use this sort of cliche to describe so much of African history and African current affairs, but do you find it is very much a tragedy that you have a place like Tunisia, you have a place like Algeria, uh, and there are also several other examples. But if we're talking just specifically about North Africa, if we look at the history of Algeria and Tunisia, this like there's really a hotbed of good left movements, people who offer an alternative left vision from a lot of the betrayals of the ruling parties, and that it's just a tragedy that that's not been able to advance. And then when we look back at the so-called Arab Spring or North African Spring, uh, so much of the legitimate grievances and legitimate protests that were happening in Tunisia, also in Morocco, in Algeria to a lesser degree in Egypt, all of those got quickly just co-opted, and still the very things that people were protesting: income inequality, neoliberalism, Western imperialism having way too much influence on the socioeconomic affairs and so forth. That it's just in that respect, it's very much a tragedy that Tunisia, Algeria have been sold so short. So all of those protests and the only thing that happened was just things got completely reconstructed, but neoliberalism is still the same. And then of course, with Libya, Libya, that was a Western imperialist project, and Syria, that's a Western imperialist project. Very curious your response to all I've just said.
Yeah, I think it ties into all of Africa facing the same historical tragedy with the central geographical positioning of the continent and all its regions. You also have to look at the vast amount of natural resources, strategic minerals, strategic metals. All of this should position Africa to be one of the leading world powers. But until there's unity, until there's a unity of purpose and ideological orientation, it's going to be stifled. And it's the same thing with West Asia as well. And what we've seen is uprisings, we've seen rebellions, we've seen surges towards independence, against colonialism and also against neocolonialism. But what we lack is the unity of purpose and a clear ideological orientation. And these territories could be like modern day paradises, from the standpoint that Egypt is right there on the crux of the gateway to West Asia and Southern Europe. Same situation with Tunisia, Morocco, as well as Algeria. And we can move further south into Mauritania, Senegal, Chad, Sudan. All of these countries have vast, vast natural economic resources that could be exploited for the benefit of the people of Africa. And I think that's why imperialism does not want to let Africa loose. They want to maintain control over the continent because of its vast wealth and vast resources. And also the fact that 60, 70% of the population is under 25 years old. So the energy, the labor power there is just absolutely enormous. So it's going to be a challenge, but it has to happen because really there's no other alternative if we look at the future. And that's true even of Europe as well. I mean, we see this resurgence of right-wing political parties in Europe. We see it in Germany, France, the United Kingdom. But that is not going to be a solution. It can only lead to world war. We saw what is happening in regard to NATO, how they're stepping up their rhetoric against the Russian Federation, saying that Russia wants war, we have to be prepared for war. Then Trump is playing a very dubious role. Only thing he's looking forward to is perhaps getting a Nobel Peace Prize for nothing. You know, just like the woman from Venezuela,
Yeah,
who's being hailed in Norway, in Oslo. What peace have they brought? They have U.S. troops off the coast of Venezuela. They're killing people, innocent people. They just hijacked a oil vessel. So what kind of peace are they talking about? They're talking about a peace of the natural resources.
The oil.
Exactly. They want all the oil. And that's true of Africa as well, whether it's Algeria, where you have oil and natural resources, Tunisia, where you have vast, beautiful land, tremendous history. One of the oldest mosques built in Northwest Africa is there in Tunisia. They have the ruins of the Carthaginian Empire is there. And all of these things are major attractions for tourism. But it's being done at the expense of the young people and the working class people and the farmers inside the country. And that's true of the whole Maghreb region of North Africa.
I'm going to ask you this bonus question because I can't let you go without asking this bonus question. Talk a bit
Okay.
more about the talk a bit more about the tourist industry because I don't think. Hold up. Hold up. 1 second, folks. Abayomi, can you hear me? Uh, yes. Okay. Abayomi, can you hear me
That's
right now?
better. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So very quickly, I have to ask you this question: Is can you talk a bit more about the tourist industry and why it's really bad for a place like
Frozen
Tunisia
again.
or any place? Ah, uh, okay. One moment, folks. One moment, folks. Uh hold up, hold up, hold up.
All right, that sounds better there.
Okay, okay. So Abiyomi, so very quickly, can you talk a bit more about the tourist industry and why it's so bad for not just a place like Tunisia, but a place like Cyprus or Italy or Spain and so forth? I'm very curious your response on that because so go ahead and talk about
Yeah, just to touch on that. Yeah, the space, the resources, the cultural influence, all of these things are now growing to be major irritants and sources of resentment in North Africa as well as in Southern Europe. I've seen areas of Greece and Italy where people are complaining, about the influx of tourists. And that's a major problem in Europe, Southern Europe, and particularly in North Africa. And even in the United States, you know, a lot of people are really, really upset, because of the emphasis that is placed on tourism, even here in Detroit, for example. Now, we're right on the border with Canada. We're surrounded by the Great Lakes. And of course, being a historical industrial hub of the world, in fact, uh, because of the changes that have been made in Detroit over the last 2 decades and the outmigration, principally of African Americans and other working class people from the city, they're putting more emphasis on tourism, restaurants, fancy restaurants, tourist sites, hotels for conventions. They built up the riverfront in Detroit, several miles where people can walk along the river. Yeah, but it's totally neglectful, though, of the working class and poor people here in the city who are still impoverished and are still being forced out of the city because to make room, for the tourists, to make room for high income people who are coming in to rent the newer and repurposed apartments and condominiums and homes that exist in the downtown, principally in the downtown area. So this
it.
is the problem. It's a worldwide problem.
My understanding that the problem when you have an industry which is too dependent on tourism is that first you have the hotels. Okay, so
Yes,
so first you have the hotels, and often the kind of employment that an industry like like the hotel industry or restaurants and stuff like that is that it's very cheap precarious form of employment and so forth.
it
And when there
is.
is and when there is no tourism happening, when it is in when it is in summertime or something like that, those those very industries actually have a very hard time paying their workers and so forth like that. So you're constantly in a cheap form of labor where you
Mhm.
don't have much where you don't have much collective bargaining, and then if the and then with that happening, if there's not a consistent amount of customers and clientele, the restaurant can go bust, the hotel can go bust itself unless somebody bails it out, and therefore the tourism industry is not a very good it's just not a very good reliable form of industry if we want to talk about consistent employment, living and wages that keep up with the cost of inflation, the cost of living and inflation and so forth. Correct.
Yeah, I think it's good for the hotel owners, perhaps the restaurant owners, and people who own businesses in the tourism area because you have a constant influx of people who are consumers and who have money disposable income to spend. But when you have something like the COVID-19 pandemic that started 6 years ago, where hotels were closed down, restaurants were closed down, mass unemployment. So it's a problem. And they have not been able to fully recover here in the States. And you can go downtown in Detroit, for example, right now and find buildings that have very low occupancy. A lot of the employees, white collar employees, are working from home. A lot of the restaurants don't open until the evening because a lot of the employees are working from home, so they're not going out to lunch after work. And then, of course, sports too is a major attraction, not only for the local people, but for tourism, people who live outside the city and people who come in for the big sports games. For example, like the upcoming Super Bowl, the bowl games. People hop on planes, for example, if the Detroit Lions are playing in Green Bay, or if they're playing in LA or wherever, they'll hop on a plane and go there. So you may have hundreds, if not thousands, of fans from the opposing team that are there right there in the stadium watching the game. And so it's big money for them. Plus, these sporting
Wow, the irony.
these sporting venues and entertainment venues, a lot of them are subsidized by the taxpayers in the particular cities that host them. For example, in Detroit, we've been protesting against this for years. They've built a new arena. It's called Little Caesars Arena, after the pizza magnate, Mike Ilitch, who is deceased now, but his family runs the business. Yeah, so those people were able to build that stadium because they took money from the working class taxpayers here in Detroit to construct Little Caesars Arena. That's where the Detroit Red Wings play. It's where the Pistons play, and they have big concerts there as well. Same is true for the Detroit Tigers and the Lions. They have fairly new stadiums, and they were built as a result of taxing the people. Yet the schools are going, bad to worse. The library system is suffering. The infrastructure of the city is constantly deteriorating. And of course, the problem with foreclosures and evictions still remains a major issue in the city. So we can transpose that back to North Africa, for example, where you see people in Morocco in particular angry because accommodations are being created for the various soccer cups that are taking place, whether it's the Africa Cup or others. Room is being made, for tourists to come in and to stay in hotels and Airbnbs. And what happens after the tourists leave is the question. A lot of those buildings are abandoned or they deteriorate. So yeah, I think the developing states have to come up with better methods for generating income than just tourism. We see this heavily in the Caribbean, in some parts of Central America and South America as well. And the U.S. is very keen on disrupting tourism within countries in which they have political differences, like closing the airspace of Venezuela, which has not been closed, incidentally, because people are still flying in from other Latin American countries and so forth. But it is a serious problem. The fact that they are bombing boats off the coast in the Caribbean and the Pacific around Venezuela, the hijacking of a oil tanker that happened just 2 days ago. So yeah, that's a serious problem. So I think Tunisia has a lot of potential, has a lot of territory. The population is about a little over 12 million people. But at the same time, the fact that it is so closely linked with the European Union and the tourism and the legacy of French colonialism, that it has to overcome that before it could become a genuinely independent nation state.
Fascinating, and one of these days we'll have to we will re-explore actually the topic of tourism, because that's something I don't think many leftists pay too much attention to, and they should. So
Yeah, definitely.
so we'll definitely do that. Well, that's a perfect place to end. We were joined on this edition of One Plus One, our All Things Africa edition, our journey across the continent with Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan African Newswire and frequent contributor to Black Agenda Reports, who was a historian, journalist, longtime people power activist, and anti-imperialist campaigner. Check out his work at both places and donate generously to both places, as well as share widely and donate to One Plus One. The next country we'll be exploring is Egypt, but the holiday season is coming up, so we'll be taking a Christmas hiatus. I may still be doing some episodes during December, but we're going to let Abayomi enjoy some Christmas time off. When we do come back, and cover African affairs again, we will return Friday, January the 16th, and we'll be exploring the history and current affairs of Egypt. So join us for that. And before I end, I want to first of all thank Abayomi, because for I think an entire year or over half of a year, he has given us so generously his time nearly every Friday, unless he or I have an emergency or other commitments to tend to. Abayomi has given us his Fridays to teach us about each African country. And I don't even think there's ever been a series like this in any indie leftist news any news globally, or certainly not on YouTube. And he is going to be continuing to do this for us next year until we reach the last African country, which will be Madagascar. So I want to thank him wholeheartedly for that. And for that, I ask our audience to please subscribe to Pan African Newswire, also subscribe to Black Agenda Reports, and donate generously to them. And I also want to take the time to thank Chris Richards, Chris Richards of the Eclectic Radical, which is another brilliant outlet that people should subscribe and check out and become a Patreon to Chris. Chris is the only other indie leftist to invite me on his platform to discuss countless topics, always from a critical leftist perspective. And he is a brilliant anti-white supremacist voice, anti-heteronormative voice, anti-patriarchy, misogyny. He's also anti-ableist and also just a very brilliant anti-capitalist folks. So do donate and become a regular Patreon to him, because you're actually helping me out as well. So my deepest thanks to both Abayomi and Chris. Have a very Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy Hanukkah, only to Jewish anti-Zionist voices, though. And to those who aren't controlled opposition, happy holidays to everyone, or whatever is the tradition you follow. Good night and good luck. And again, there might be a chance that I might be doing episodes during the holidays, but if not, we will be returning with our Africa series January 16th. All my best. Good night and good luck until then.